So let's talk about The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost and Imagery. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So notice that the poem is divided into stanzas of 5 lines each, and it is the ABAB rhyme scheme that we're familiar with, right? Would, both, stood, um, could, and then growth. So it's actually an ABCCD rhyme. And since we're focusing in on image, I'm not going to focus, more on rhyme scheme, but I will look at image and we'll notice that the woods are yellow woods. And so we have some sense of the time of year which is being conveyed through these yellowing woods. It's not a green wood, is it? And so we have some sense of not only the time of year for when this person is traveling, but perhaps also time of year in this person's life, right? A moment of reflection in his life. And so notice the distinction between the two roads and the one traveler, right? A one traveler is only able to travel down one road, and the fact that these roads are diverging means that this traveler has to make a choice. And so the image that's evoked in the first stanza is this image of a fork in the road, right? And we know this image, right? We often speak of it figuratively, right? A fork in the road, a place where you've got to make a decision of either doing one thing or another. And one of the reasons why we have this image is because of this poem. It's a very, very famous poem. And of course, there is sorrow, right? Because there is not only the desire when you see two different roads to figure out, how the road you are going to take is going to end up, but also the road that you're not going to take. You wonder where that road might lead you to. And so this sense of this fork in the road leads the eye to wonder, what if, right? And this is a natural thing that we are all subject to. And be one traveler, long I stood, and we have some sense of time, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. And notice this idea, this image is this image of not a straight road, right? It's not a straight road. If it were a straight road, then then the eye could easily determine which way to take. But in fact, all roads to the future are bending roads, right? All roads to the future bend, right? That's the problem. That's why no one can actually see into the future. And so in this poem, the extended metaphor of woods, right, allows the writer, Robert Frost, to evoke the idea of undergrowth, right? Certain paths are covered, right? And so the metaphor of woods allows access to one of the defining characteristics of woods, which is undergrowth. And this defining characteristic of woods, undergrowth, can then be used to make the figurative comparison to the future as a kind of road that bends, and very often the path to the future is as unclear as the undergrowth in a path of wooded forest. That's the comparison, right? If a metaphor allows a comparison between unlike things, the quality of undergrowth in the woods allows for an extended meditation on the idea of the future as something that is not only covered, right? It's hidden. Future is always hidden from us, but also just as paths bend in the woods, so too does a person's future always bend. It's never clear what is going to be the end of one's future. Then took the other, and we don't know we don't know which of the two. Well, we know which of the two the writer took, but the writer's got to make a decision, right? Because the writer is only one traveler. They made a decision, and the decision that they make is described in the stanza. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And so, in this stanza, we see the traveler trying to make a judgment based on observations, right? How do you make judgments about what you're going to do in your future? Well, you're going to make it based on observations that are readily available, right? And so, just as a person decides whether or not they're going to buy a house by looking at their readily available funds, this traveler who's going through these woods also tries to judge which path they're going to take. And judging that there's one path that is grassy and wanted wear, right? And the word grassy over here contrasts with the word yellow over here, right? Right? While the rest of the woods are yellowing, the traveler finds a grassy path, right? A path that wanted wear. And so we see in this line the idea of a path that's less traveled, right? And we know that it's less traveled because, first of all, it wants wear. Not too many people have traveled on it. It's not a worn down path. And the second thing is that it's grassy. If it had been traveled a lot, then all of the grass would have been trampled over. The fact of the matter is not too many people have gone down this path. And because the traveler has taken the less traveled path, they reason to themselves that this path is the better path, right? It's the path that fewer people have gone down, and so therefore, maybe it's better for that reason. But even as these lines give that rationale for trying to take a less traveled path, the last two lines of the stanza suggest that even this kind of judgment through readily available observations is something that has its limitations. You cannot judge your future based on facts that are available to you now. There is just no way of accurately doing it. And that is acknowledged in these two lines, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same, right? At first, one path seems to be more grassy than the other, but really, as for that passing, as the traveler actually goes down that path, as they're traveling, they realize that both paths have really been worn about the same, that one is not better than the other. And so the future always looks different after one has decided on a course of action in order to pursue it. In other words, as you start to move towards the future, the path that you have taken starts to itself look different than it did when you first began to make your decisions, when you first began to make your choices. Again, the poem is very much about temporality and about perspectives. Do you still have the same perspective down the road that you did before you started your journey? And that's part of what the poem is dwelling upon. And both that morning equally lay, meaning both paths that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. And notice the color scheme, right? We started off with yellow in the first stanza, and grassy and green in the second stanza, and now we have this image of black, right? Different images. If yellow suggests a kind of decline in summertime, and grassy suggests that this path looked really, really verdant and so worth walking on, now, as the person is starting to take that path, they're noticing that in both of these paths, in leaves no step had trodden black. Neither of these paths, it seemed like one seemed more well-worn than the other. As the traveler starts to travel, they realize that neither path had ever really been trodden. right? Neither the path they're taking, nor the other path that they decide not to take. And again, perspective changes as one makes decisions based on the future that they think they are moving towards, right? They are moving towards. Oh, and this word oh suggests the first bit of emotion in the poem. Oh, I had kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. And so there's the added complication of the fact that not only is the future never a straight path, but in fact, the future is not even one road, right? Because there is one path. The forest doesn't just fork into two different paths, but every one of these forks in the road leads to other forks down the road as well, right? And so one fork in the road leads to other forks in the road, right? And so there is this idea of a kind of there's this idea of kind of an exponential growth, right? Things that are things that are subdividing rapidly, at a very, very rapid pace. And that first morning, that specific morning, then becomes a reflection back on another day. I wish I had delayed that morning's decision to another day. Yet, clearly it doesn't really matter whether they had taken one path or taken the other path, because whatever path they would have taken would have led to yet another fork in the road. And knowing how way leads on to way, so one fork leads to another fork in the road leads to more forks down the road, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. And as we all know, in life as well, there is no return, right? There is no return to yesterday, right? Even if the person was able to literally in the woods retrace their steps back to where they started from, it would be very, very difficult for them to redo their journey, right? Because way leads on to way. And remember also, one way in which walking towards your future is a little bit different than walking in the woods is walking in the woods involves tracing and retracing paths that remain the same. But in life, every path that you take, even the ones that you think you're retracing, are actually new ones. That's one way in which the wood metaphor has its limitations. Even if you think you're going back in the past and doing a redo, that return to the past actually is a new kind of path. You may not admit it to yourself, but it is. That in itself is a new path that you're taking towards the future. The difference between actual woods and the sort of figurative woods of one's future is that actual woods never change, but one's future always changes. The last stanza is the famous one, I shall be telling this with a sigh. And of course, every decision a person makes always has one second guessing whether or not we've made the right decision or not. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Not necessarily a sigh of regret, but a sigh of the human nature that comes along with second guessing. If I had only done X, then Y wouldn't have happened. And there is that sigh. And again, the sigh does not necessarily mean that the person has made a decision that they have regretted, but only the fact that they acknowledge their human nature. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. And so we notice how much the poem is about time. The poem goes from talking about that morning, right, which is a very, very specific unit of time, to talking about somewhere ages and ages hence. So the writer realizes that no matter what I had done that morning, my sense of regret, or at least my sense of second guessing myself, would never have gone away. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in the woods, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. We don't know, again, whether it's made a difference for the better or for the worse. If we're tempted to say that he's made a bad decision and so therefore he's regretting it, be careful. Even the sigh that's given over here does not necessarily indicate the end result of that decision so much as the second guessing of what if I had done things differently. There's a poetic device that Frost uses over here, which is that he ends one line with one word and then he begins the next line with that same word. It's a kind of repetition that is known as epinelepsis, and this is a repetition of words at the end and the beginning of a line. And notice what this does. The effect of this is to slow down, right? The effect of having this repetition of words slows down and creates a moment of reflection, right? A reflection of what if, right? And that's exactly the epinelepsis allows for us to give a sense of the reader kind of wanting to second guess himself, right? That moment of hesitation, which creates a sense of reflection. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So lots of imagery over here, and plenty to write about. It's a very, very famous poem. So I'm going to stop here.